Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Our guest on the program, Jody Berger, a freelance journalist, holistic health coach. She was a reporter for ESPN Magazine for 5 years, shaped the way it covered extreme sports. She's freelanced for Self, Teen Help, Harper's Bazaar, and others. Subsequently, she became a reporter for the Rocky Mountain News, where she wrote about athletes, coaches, championship dreams, and the Olympic Games, and author of the new book, an excellent book called Misdiagnosed, One Woman's Tour of and Escape from Healthcare Land. Jody Berger, our guest on This Week in America. Hi, Jody. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
This is really such an important program because we all face these health issues, and we're going to talk about many of them during the course of the program. Let's pick it up with your story. You're 43 years old, award-winning journalist, a marathoner. You have this minor tingling in your hands and feet, which you described as what more irritating than actually painful. But you decide to go to the doctor. Pick up the story from there, and we'll start this experience that you were on to finally figure out exactly what the problem was.
Okay. So yeah, I had this tingling and I felt like it meant something. It hadn't been there before. So I picked a doctor off my HMO's website, and I'd been healthy my whole life, so I didn't have a whole lot of experience with doctors. And I really didn't know what I was in for, but I went to see a primary care doc. She spent about 5 minutes with me and said, you should see a neurologist. So I did. I made an appointment with him. He spent maybe 15 minutes with me, asked me a bunch of questions, had me do some balance tests, follow his finger with my eyes.
Right.
And then said, oh, you should get a bunch of blood tests and an MRI.
What's interesting, and let's go back when you go to the primary care physician, you do as many of us do. We go to the HMO website and we pick a doctor.
Yes.
And you picked your doctor very methodically, scientifically. But she had curly hair like you, and who can go wrong with a Dr. Wise?
Uh-huh. I mean, I think people who are probably more savvy consumers of healthcare might have looked at patient reviews or credentials, but I don't know. I picked the one who had curly hair.
It's interesting. I read a statistic the other day. More people actually spend more time trying to figure out their cell phone plan and picking it than picking a doctor. So I think that's probably normal where you go. You maybe find somebody that looks like a nice doctor. I'm going to go talk with them. So you go to her and you spend literally a few minutes. She sends you off to a neurologist, and he doesn't spend a whole lot more time. But he sends you for tests.
Yes.
And you'd never been a hospital patient before. You're right that you'd been there when you were covering some athletes who were in the hospital, but you had never been a patient before. Talk about that experience, because, again, we can all sort of relate to what you went through, especially on a first visit to a hospital.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of overwhelming. I get there, I check in, I sit in the waiting room, and I wait and wait and wait. As I'm waiting, I'm getting a little anxious about the whole thing. I'm realizing, like, oh, this is where sick people go. And I didn't really feel like I was sick, but the experience was scary and made me think that. And then going into the MRI, the woman who was running it for me, she sort of was very gruff and didn't, and was very quick. She actually said, oh, I think you have MS. And I was like, what?
Yeah, it's interesting. The tech is sort of preliminarily giving you a diagnosis.
Right. Which I understand. Everybody, all the doctors I spoke to was like, gosh, that shouldn't happen, which I can see why. But it did. And it was pretty scary.
The book is called Misdiagnosed, One Woman's Tour of and Escape from Healthcare Land. Our guest on the program is Jody Berger. The book is available all across the country. Information at Amazon, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And Jody's website, which is Jody, Jody-Berger, Berger.com. Go to our website and link on directly to that website. As you're there, and throughout this process, there's talk of insurance and what the cost is, and you were asking that along the way, and nobody could ever really give you a specific answer, and whether or not this is going to be covered out of network or whatever. Just it's a side issue, but it's interesting. It kept coming up. When you're there and you're about to get a diagnosis and you're fearing the worst because she's dropping MS on you, how difficult is it to really put things in perspective? Do you really care at that point whether you're paying out of pocket or what the cost of this is?
No. I mean, honestly, I asked her, she said, oh, it'll be expensive. And for a moment, I was like, well, what does that mean? But then I thought, no, well, right. Is that really an issue that matters right now? I'm terrified. I think I might be sick. Whatever it takes, let's just do it. And so I think people probably in that same situation, you're afraid, so you don't know to ask all these questions, and then you get this bill later that's a little shocking.
Well, one great point of the book, it misdiagnosed the name One Woman's Tour and Escape from Healthcare Land, is you really talk about what consumers can do at the end of the book. There are great resources there, questions that need to be asked, and we'll talk about that before the end of the program today. But you're thinking it's MS, you're about to leave the country, you're trying to get to talk to the doctor, and he basically, over the telephone, says it's MS.
Right. So after the day after the MRI, I'm sort of, I'm about to leave on this trip, as you say, and I'm running around doing sort of the last minute things you do before traveling, stopping the mail, buying sunblock, and I'm home, and he calls, and in a, 3-minute conversation, he says, "Oh, well, got your MRI back, and you have MS," which was terrifying. And then sort of the tingling, which had just been sort of in my fingertips, all of a sudden was like a full body experience. Like every piece of me was just terrified. Um, and he said, "If you want to talk about it, I could stay after my last patient and tell you a little bit more." And I thought, of course I want to talk about that. I need more information than this.
Yeah, you're just getting a life-changing, a life-altering diagnosis. It would be nice to spend a few minutes talking
Exactly.
to him
Somebody
about
should
it.
explain this to me, tell me what it means, what I can do, what the future looks like. Yeah, so I went to see him after his last patient, and it was, oh God, it was a really scary time.
You talked to a friend of yours who was a life coach, and the first thing he told you was breathe. And I bring that
Yes.
up because that's probably so important. All these emotions, and you said all of a sudden this little tingling has become this major tingling.
Right.
I would assume breathing is something we all need to do when we get bad news of any kind, so we can sort of like get grounded and sort through all of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was the best advice he could have given me at that time. I mean, he just said, "Hang on, take a deep breath. Let's think through this." And he stayed on the phone with me, and he kept saying, he was like, "Inhale, exhale." Because in that moment, I really was so afraid I sort of forgot how. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it was so terrorizing that somebody telling me to breathe was really helpful.
Jody Berger, our guest on This Week in America. The book is called Misdiagnosed, One Woman's Tour of and Escape from Healthcare Land. The book is an excellent, important book. It's available all across the country. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And Jody's website, which is jody-berger.com. You can link on directly to that by going to our website. And when you sit there with the doctor, this is not like he really opened up and gave you a lot of information. He basically said what you had was a flare up. Here are some steroids and try to get through the rest of your life.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, I asked him all kinds of questions about, like, well, where did this come from? How did this happen? And his answers were really unsatisfying. Basically, he said, well, not, I mean, he said, "This is the most common diagnosis I make in people like you." So I felt like he just sort of profiled me. I was female, I was young-ish, and athletic. And he said, "In that category, this is what I diagnose." So I felt like it didn't even really relate to me specifically. It was more sort of I fit a category that could have this disease.
So you do the reporter thing. You go back and you get online and you start looking. And when you were looking at MS, what you need to have a couple of episodes, you didn't have that. Is that when this doubt was firmly planted in your mind that I'm not real sure this is accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the M stands for multiple, which means multiple incidences, multiple neurological incidences. And I felt like I just had this tingling. That was the only thing I'd ever had. It didn't feel like more than one event. And when I brought this up with the doctor later, he said, "Well, you know, it stayed long enough that it probably was sequential episodes that all strung together," which sounded like a reach to me. That just sounded, I couldn't buy into that. I had trouble with that one.
So based on that, you decide I'm going to go talk to others, and they're detailed in the book, Misdiagnosed, One Woman's Tour of and Escape from Healthcare Land. Jody Berger, our guest on This Week in America. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. This has been described as an exhausting journey, and it really was. But what gave you the strength in the beginning? Because most people hear what a doctor says, and it's like, that's a doctor. The guy went to school, cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
I'm going to believe what he tells me, and I'm going to go out of there and take my medication and hope life goes on okay. You didn't accept that.
For a couple reasons. one, I didn't want to. I didn't want it to be true. But also, I was a trained journalist. And so I'm in the habit of asking a lot of questions and asking over and over. And I asked questions of him and I didn't get very satisfying answers. So I felt like, well, I'm going to find another source. I'll ask another person until I get answers that make sense to me. And as it turned out, I had to ask a whole lot of doctors before I got answers
Well,
that.
you ask a whole lot of doctors, and you were getting different explanations. Almost every doctor had a different explanation.
Yeah, which was really scary until it became funny because I thought, well, I can't have all these things, like I didn't feel that bad. Yeah, so I just kept going until I found, like I said, an answer that made sense to me.
Now, as you're talking to all of these different doctors during the course of, it was about a year that you were doing this, were there any moments, any time when you thought, okay, maybe this makes sense to me. This is right. This is what I have. I will accept it and move on with my life. But you kept going from one to another. You obviously weren't satisfied with any of the explanations you were getting.
No. And in the beginning, I thought once I get two doctors that match, I'll believe, but I didn't. Everyone had a different experience. And everyone, it seemed to me that whatever their area of expertise was, whatever they were looking for, they found. So the doctor who thought heavy metal toxicity could explain everything found that I had heavy metal toxicity. The doctor who was really into sort of nutritional testing said, oh, well, you have nutritional deficiencies, which, I kind of liked that one. That seemed fixable. But it was sort of amazing. Everybody, whatever they were looking for, they found. And I thought, no, this can't all be true.
There's a point during this search to try to find the answer, an answer that made sense to you, that you go back to Dr. Wise with the curly hair and where this all started.
Yes.
And she left the room and never came back in.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Talk about that, because that's sort of, many of us probably have experienced that, where we're questioning a doctor, questioning authority. And she didn't really take that too well, did she?
No, not at all. And she hadn't seen the MRI. She just saw, like in my record, that there was an MRI that showed a likeliness of multiple sclerosis. And she was looking at my record on her computer, and she said, well, you're going to take the drugs, aren't you? And I said, no, I don't want to. I think that there could be another explanation. I'm not sure that's what I have. And she became indignant and said, MS patients were dying for those drugs. And I thought, well, I don't want to die for anything, and I'm not convinced I'm an MS patient. And then she just got up and left, leaving me sitting there, and it was so abrupt that I assumed she was coming back. So I just sat there and sat there, and then finally a nurse came in and said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm waiting for her to come back. And the nurse said, no, I don't think she's coming back. She was, I mean, in retrospect, it's funny, but at the time it was like bewildering, and I was angry, and I was sad. I mean, it was like, oh, it was just awful.
What's interesting is the perseverance that you had. And I keep coming back to that because so many of us can get lost and decide, okay, we're going to quit this journey now. And again, accept what we're told. You kept persevering. Talk about when you finally got to a doctor who listened to you and actually made some sense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was great. Like she spent the doctor who's now my doctor, the one who sorted this all out in the end. When I called to make an appointment with her, the person who made the appointment said, leave an hour and a half. And I thought, wow, a doctor's could spend an hour and a half with me? That's pretty incredible. And then she said, and we're going to send you can go to our website and you fill out this really lengthy questionnaire and send us copies of all your medical tests. And the doctor will actually look through all that stuff, read the questionnaire, look through your previous tests before you show up. And I thought, oh my God, this woman's going to spend a ton of time thinking about me. So going in, I felt sort of confident that she would have more information about me than any of the previous doctors. And then I got there and she was kind and she was nice. And honestly, for me, that went a really long way. It felt like she and I kind of wanted the same thing. We both wanted me to be healthy.
And suddenly things changed when she asked the question, what are you eating?
I know, which seems a very simple question.
Yes, it does.
But she was the first one to ask that.
And because of that, talk about where she went with that, and all of a sudden you're having a complete recovery.
Yeah, I mean, she said, what are you eating? And I told her, I said, oh, I eat pretty healthy. And I think she kind of didn't really believe me because by that point I had been tested for nutritional deficiencies and I was deficient across the board. And so she thought, well, you can't be eating that well and not have this any of these values in your body. So she had me write down everything I ate for a week. I came back, she looked at it, and she said, oh, huh. you don't eat that bad. Something's going on here, though. There's some disconnect between what you're eating and what value you're getting out of your food. So let's look at it. Let's do an elimination diet, which means you stop eating all the really common allergens like nuts, eggs, dairy, gluten, nightshade vegetables, alcohol, and caffeine. So I did that for 3 weeks, and then I would slowly introduce stuff back. Like I'd boil an egg, eat it, wait 3 days to see if I had a response, and on and on. And then when I reintroduced gluten, I just made like a really simple bowl of pasta, ate it for dinner, went to sleep, and woke up the next day feeling like I'd been in a car wreck. Like all my joints ached. I was just sort of like, that pre-flu feeling when you just feel like everything's off.
Yes.
It was like that. And I mentioned this to my doctor, and she said, well, Jody, you really can't eat gluten. And I still I know this is sort of hard. This is hard for even me to believe, but I was like, but I've been tested for celiac disease. And she said, well, okay, the test isn't the most reliable. What do you think's a better diagnostic tool, your body or this test? And I had to agree with her.
Well,
And so I stopped eating gluten and everything got better.
that's one of the things that you emphasize in the book is listen to your body. Despite the fact the tests were saying this isn't the problem, your body's saying, excuse me, this is the problem.
Exactly. And my body was saying it very loud and clear that day. I mean, it was like such a big reaction to eating, like I said, a pretty simple bowl of pasta.
It's interesting, and I want to make sure I read this correctly. You continued to do research on MS. You had an experience going to an MS organization out in that area. A little surprised at that, and the results are in the book Misdiagnosed. One woman's tour of an escape from healthcare land. But you talk about 14% of MS specialists see misdiagnoses with patients, but they don't tell the patient. I'm stumbling over that because I can't believe those words are actually true. 14% see a misdiagnosis, but they don't say anything to the patient. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, I was amazed when I saw it too. These three doctors who are MS specialists, they were all at Oregon Science and Health University at the time. And they surveyed all the MS specialists in the country, and there's about 400. And it's a subset of neurologists. These are people who just work with MS patients or work predominantly with them. And they surveyed all their colleagues and said, how many of you have seen a long-standing MS diagnosis in the last year? And nearly all of them had. And then they asked other questions like, so what did you do? Did you tell the patient? And 14% said no, that they let the patient go on believing that they had a disease that they didn't have. I was astonished by that.
Well, I read that 3 times and wanted to make sure there wasn't a misprint that I found in the copy of the book, that I'm actually reading that correctly. The book is excellent. It's Misdiagnosed, One Woman's Tour of an Escape from Healthcare Land. Jody Berger, our guest on the program. The book is available, of course, Amazon, bookstores all across the country. Information at Jody's website, which is Jody, Jody -Berger, BERGER.com. And, of course, at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Got a minute or so left in the program. And I mentioned in the back of the book sort of the questions that you really need to ask. Do you find, and your case is a perfect example, when we go into a doctor, we really aren't prepared to go into the doctor by asking specific questions, and it's something so important, and you think about that afterwards, it's like, I wish I would have asked, and there's that intimidation factor as well when we're sitting in there.
Absolutely. Like you go in, you're a little bit scared because you're probably going to a doctor because something's not working right.
Yes.
And then there's that whole sort of imbalance of power. The doctor's calling me Jody. I'm calling him doctor. I'm wearing a paper gown and he's wearing a suit. It's uncomfortable anyway. And like I said, every doctor kept looking for whatever they could find in their area of expertise. And I thought after a few of these, it took me a while to sort of regain my journalistic composure and say, oh, I need to approach this like I would approach an interview. I will make a list of questions so that whatever's happening in that room, I get the information that I know I need. And then my editor at Source Books, who was really brilliant, said, Jody, why don't you put those questions in the back of the book so other people can use them? Because they're pretty straight up questions like, how reliable is this test? Could it be anything else? Like all these questions that I started asking every time, and I think are useful for a lot of people.
Well, several questions, and you just mentioned that. What else could cause this result when you're getting a test back? And are there other ways to read this test? And in many cases, it's not like a simple one answer question or yes or no, multiple
Absolutely.
answers possibly.
Right. And also, so those three MS specialists that surveyed their peers, they said, diagnosing, especially something like MS, it's more of an art than a science. There's not one hard and fast test. So it's a clinical diagnosis. You have to work with the patient, ask them a lot of questions, and sort of observe how they are, which I think is impossible in a 15-minute session with a neurologist.
Yeah, it's amazing that you went in, and we'll go back to the beginning, and then we're going to run out of time here. But basically, you have one MRI and literally a handful of minutes, and you've got the tech that's beginning this process by telling you, whoops, I think it's MS, and then the
Yeah.
doctor over the telephone telling you it's MS. I mean, that's how basically your life changed for definitely for a year, and for many people, probably their life has changed permanently.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just too big a pronouncement for that short amount of information, that short amount of time and that little information. Doctors need more to go on.
It's
And
a
I certainly did as a patient.
Well, it's an inspirational story and something that all of us as consumers of healthcare need. And again, you point out that listen to your body, ask the right questions, choose. What's interesting, the doctor told you meditation would work rather than medication.
Yeah, which I'm grateful for. And I still practice meditation every day. And the research shows that actually a meditation practice does change the physicality of a brain.
And
The
remember,
brain rewires itself during that process.
when you get news like that, breathe. That is
Yeah.
so important to breathe. We find ourselves out of breath, and suddenly every limb in your body is hurting as you're getting that diagnosis. The book is called Misdiagnosed: One Woman's Tour of and Escape from Healthcare Land. Jody Berger has been our guest on the program. Book available all across the country. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And Jody's website, jody-berger.com. Jody, a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this.
It's been our pleasure. You're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.